National Geographic and the Times Picayune. They forecast the apocalypse, said it was coming soon. Preparations must be made, they said. Now is the time. It was years ago, they shouted. Inaction was a crime. They said the dikes must be improved and the wetlands must be saved. But Washington decided instead they should be paved, 'cause laws were more important than people's...
Bringing peace and social justice issues into your living room, piece by piece. I'm your host, Pat Miner, and this evening we have two very special guests with us. We have Harry Fear, who has he's a documentary filmmaker from the UK, and he's been in Gaza during the last incursion there. And he's going to tell us exactly what happened, and now he's on a worldwide tour talking about it. And our viewers will remember Yasser Abu Daga. He's from Gaza, and so I thought it would be a good idea to bring the two of them together, and we'll all talk about the issue. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit, Harry?
Sure. My name is Harry Fear. I'm in my early 20s. I'm a UK-based documentary maker, journalist, and human rights activist. And in North America, I'm most known for what I do in Gaza, which is making video reports. And while I was most recently there, we actually had the recent 8-day war with Israel. So I was there for every minute and second of the war, documenting what was going on, particularly by live broadcast, actually, over the internet. And I also dabbled with various international news organizations. So that was somewhat of an experience to talk about, which is why I'm now in Iowa as my first stop for the US tour.
Yeah, it's the first time you've been in Iowa. Welcome.
Thank you.
And I'm Yasser Abu Daga. I've been in the program before. I'm an Iowa resident, and I'm originally from Gaza. I've been living in Iowa for over 15 years. I call Iowa home, but I still have family in Gaza and always interested in what's going on back there.
Right.
And I'd like to thank Harry for all the work that he's doing to bring the news and to talk about the struggle of the Gaza people.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the things that happens, unfortunately, is that Gaza kind of drops off the map as soon as the incursions stop. As soon as Israel stops dropping bombs, people forget that things are still going on there. And so that's one of the advantages of having you, Harry, go around the world and talk about exactly what happened. Do you remember what happened when you heard about the first bomb?
Well, the operation lasted for 7 days and 3 hours. And it started off with the targeted assassination of a leader of one of the, what Palestinians call resistance groups, militant wings, or by US political standard, terrorist groups. And this particular guy that they chose to assassinate, and this is in a context of targeted assassinations by drone strikes and airstrikes being very normal, actually, in the Gazan experience, the particular guy that they chose to kill to begin the operation, 52-year-old Ahmed al-Jabari, was actually, despite being a senior military leader of one of the groups, he actually was also a peacemaker in the sense that he was a long-term ceasefire negotiator with Israel. And so by killing him first, it sent a very strong message to Palestinians that, stuff is going to hit the fan. And so we knew immediately, actually, that a war would start as soon as we know that this guy had been killed, confirmed killed. So you can just imagine the kind of feeling of dread that befell on all of us. Well,
I understand that he was actually in the middle of negotiating a peace deal with Israel with a man named Gershon Baskin. Are you familiar with Gershon Baskin?
Yeah, I've heard about this.
Yeah. And that he had actually, Gershon is the one, for our listeners, Gershon Baskin is the one who actually negotiated the release of Gilad Shalit, the Israeli soldier that was held by Hamas for how many, 7 years, something like that. Yeah, and he was in the middle of with Jabari and he had just that morning, is my understanding, had given him a draft of the peace agreement, which he expected Jabari to sign, or to sign off on, not sign exactly.
For the Palestinians in Gaza, I'm told that this is just another symbolic example of Israel deliberately killing the peacemaker. And so by starting the operation off on that note, you know, to many Palestinians is just another assertion that Israel doesn't want peace.
Yeah.
I guess since you were there, and the way that I see it is that the Israeli reason for the incursion, the publicized reason, is security and because of the rocket fire from Gaza into southern Israel. But a lot of people saying that Israel is just prolonging the war and they wanted to keep the status quo going on. So what do you think is the real reason behind the incursions into Gaza? And we've seen that happening 4 years ago, and it's still continuing. And then we've seen even after the ceasefire, there's still going on some stuff.
Well, this was one thing about the recent 8-day war, is that there was not an incursion in the traditional sense. There was no ground invasion,
Right.
and that's generally, perceived to be attributed to the fact that the resistance groups were able to create a level of military repellence against that by defending the borders on the ground, which it's generally considered in Palestine and in Gaza that the resistance can 100% repel any ground invasion, even against the fourth greatest military in the world. So it wasn't an incursion in the traditional sense. But the point is that it was started by Israel in an entirely arbitrary way, because the rocket fire that it's referring to is something which has gone on for years now, and it wasn't particularly elevated in the reference time that they talk about as being the starter of their self-defense operation. And also, if you look at international political analysts, they will say that Israel started this war because of this operation, its military operation, because of the Israeli domestic political situation, particularly the upcoming elections at the time, and also the North American, particularly the US political situation. And me, myself, and other analysts predicted that the operation, if it will occur before the Israeli election, would take place at that time. And so you can see that it's not about the rocket fire that analysis was attributed to, it was attributed to the geopolitical situation. And so in this sense, it's basically just another kind of bloodletting exercise from the point of view of the Israeli military, and then it will therefore have a political effect in Israel with regard to the election, etc. Now actually on that account, it was actually counterproductive, because Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, actually lost favor. He was seen as weak by the end of the war, because it only lasted 8 days in comparison to 22 days the previous notable war. So Palestinians saw it as a victory, that they're able to see off this ground occupation and see it last only 8 days, not longer.
And plus they didn't have any ground forces.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. Because and the ground forces didn't happen because.
Well, as I said, it's believed that the Palestinian resistance groups would be able to see off any ground invasion with incredible defense.
Because my point of view was, and I wasn't there, but for seeing it in the United States, what I was hearing was that the reason that they didn't have a ground incursion was because the bombs were hitting Jerusalem.
Yeah, this is of course one reason. I mean,
the bombs from Gaza.
Yeah, the rocket fire from Gaza was able to repel a ground invasion. Yes, and also there is another very significant factor, particularly on the ground invasion. Not a military factor, but a political factor, which is that there were red lines set by the international community and even Israeli allies that was saying that this was totally unacceptable. Even the US also moved towards that position. My government, the UK government, said that this was a red line. I mean, they weren't as forceful in the language, but it was essentially set up in terms of like diplomatic soft language as a red line from the UK's position. That was a very strong message. So, yeah.
I didn't hear that, but
I guess that's there was not a lot of international support to the operation, and the timing wasn't. I guess the time was in the right time for this to happen, for the Western, especially what's going on with Iran and what's going on in the Arab Spring and all that. So they felt that they're losing the international support, and that's one of the reasons that was cut short. One of the things that I want to ask you, and what we've been hearing in the media here, and what the Israeli have been iterating, and the media here is picking up, is that the Israeli army target was the militant and the rockets, but they're not targeting civilians. And so, since you were on the ground, can you describe how true is this, and what did you see there?
You know, Israel has a modern military, the fourth greatest military in the world, as I said, and something that we now, as Western citizens, associate with that is massive collateral damage. Because since World War II, more than 90% of the casualties of war have been civilians as a result of modern warfare. And Israel's targets to Israel are militants. They are terrorists or terrorist supporters or etc. Now, the problem with Israel's military policy is that it's able to incur basically unlimited civilian collateral damage to achieve its military operations. Obviously, by the world and by law, that's unacceptable. Now, as of the most recent operation, Israel was much more explicit in that being part of its policy. So the resistance fighters, or the terrorists, if you want to call them terrorists, depending on your ideological point of view, were able to produce defensive protocols to protect themselves in a much better way, not by using human shields or something like this, but by going underground and etc. And so it was basically impossible for Israel to target them in the way that it had previously. And so Israel's new policy, as of just a few weeks ago, I was there just a few weeks ago, was to target the homes of the fighters. In other words, we're happy to kill your wife, your mother, your grandmother, your grandchildren when we try and kill you. If you're not there, sorry about that in the home. If you're not in the home, sorry about that. But hopefully you will be when we try and kill you. And sorry about the family that we kill along with you. So this was the new policy that they started as a result of these defensive measures. And so that's why we saw in this most recent war, out of almost 80 Palestinians killed, we saw most of them being civilians. And among the injured casualties, more than 80% were women or children alone. So as you can see, this is, as I said, just part of Israel's use of modern warfare tactics.
Yeah, and what they say in their defense is that, well, you know, the militants hide among the civilians. It's like, well, yeah, they went home that night, you know. It just doesn't make any sense.
And another thing about this, though, is that for Israel, what its parameters are for militancy are extreme. I mean, for example, even the police officers are considered to be militants because it considers the government a terrorist organization. It's like me wiping out a cop on the side of the street because I don't like Obama, you know. So it's willing to sacrifice vast governmental, civilian infrastructure, policing infrastructure, wiped out almost all of the major police stations in the Gaza Strip during the recent operation.
They targeted police stations.
Oh yeah, they just leveled the police stations to the ground. Absolutely, yeah.
Because they consider them part of the terrorist infrastructure.
Exactly.
I wanted to shift to talk about what your work and how did you started with this and what you try to accomplish from doing this. Is there any goal in your mind? Is it educational? Is it something that you have personal interest in? Could you just give us some ideas or some?
Well, I mean, I don't have any Israeli or Palestinian family, although I have friends on both sides of the wall. But for me, it's just a matter of doing something which I think needs to be done. And by that I mean doing reportage and documentary which covers the Palestinian side of the story, which is by and large unknown in the West, and by and large is ignored and considered either irrelevant or, you know, not authoritative and etc. And so for me, even being in Gaza is actually sending a political message of solidarity, that I understand that the Palestinian narrative and understanding of history is suppressed, actually, systematically by the Western mainstream media. And so I go to try and, number one, do my best to try and give the Palestinians amplitude in their voice in the West by overcoming language barriers and other prejudices which are prevalent in Western journalists and their way of thinking. So for me, it's a matter of embedding myself in Palestinian society, that understanding of culture, language, and principle, so I can try and do my best to do that justice and then communicate that to the world in the most intellectually and emotionally potent way possible. So being a documentary maker allows me to actually spend time and get to know a subject or a story, to provide more intimacy than a normal TV journalist would. 30 seconds in and out, your news report, finish it in 2 hours, and you'll never remember the people that you've interviewed. For me, it's the opposite process. So, for example, I made a report when I was in Gaza recently. I met about 30 members of the person's family that the report was made about. So I try and get away from the kind of inhumane approach of television to try and do the opposite. And for me, there's automatically, because of this position, an inability to get onto mainstream channels and etc. But that's something that one has to accept and move away from, just get on with. And so for me, automatically, my audience is people looking for alternative and independent media. And thanks to God, there are a lot of people who are doing that, millions of people. So my audience is not small.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. Except that, unfortunately, generally, I mean, I think getting into the mainstream media is a goal that we should be reaching for, because, going into alternative media, you're almost preaching to the choir sometimes. Don't you think that?
To an extent, yes. But with my journalistic agenda, I try not to preach to the choir. And the thing is, there are so many abuses and atrocities committed that in a way it doesn't matter whether people know they've happened historically, because at least someone has to document the ones that have gone on. I mean, I give you an example. The 12 weeks I spent in Gaza last year, 2 of the incidences, I mean most obviously 2, that I reported on were not covered by any other English language news at all. So,
which ones were those? You can tell our audience about them.
Well, for example, you can see the most obvious one. It's called Direct Hits Were Confirmed. That's a reference to the Israeli press release when they targeted a guy's home who appears to be a civilian with no military or resistance links and etc. Basically partially destroyed his home a few days before his wedding. He just furnished it. A very poor man saved up to furnish his home, and then it basically got blown up a few days before the wedding. So somewhat unpleasant experience. That's Direct Hits Were Confirmed. People can Google that. And then there's a to-be-released film which is actually about a relative of yours, which looks at another incident which basically wasn't reported by the English language media with any kind of journalistic interest or will, if you will. I mean, for example, the incident I'm thinking about, the killing of a 13-year-old boy by the BBC, which I guess your audience will know is, the UK's most reputable news organisation. They didn't even investigate it or send a reporter. The whole thing was just recycled from Palestinian media press, medical press releases. So the boy was not killed, according to the BBC. He was killed, according to the BBC. They could not ascertain fact. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of thing we're up against. People don't know about the killing of innocents because no one will go and report it.
Hmm. Yeah. I think that's really, these things are really important, to have you. When I was listening to you, as soon as, I think you put out his link, mm-hmm. and I was listening to you like right from the very beginning. You had a live feed right there, yep. from the ground, and you were getting information in. Mm. And can you talk about how that was and how that came about? I mean, what caused that decision?
Being a documentary filmmaker, I do not do it because I love working with video, because I think I'm an artist or something like this. I do it because it's one of the most potent ways to communicate with people. It's just a means to an end. But during the war, in the first hours of it starting, it was obvious that there'd be no way I could work in my normal way, making videos to document this person being killed and etc. because of the sheer number of incidents. So even I mean, other opportunities for documenting were also out of the question, because basically every minute someone was killed. So the only option really was to try and get the information out to the world via a live broadcast. So I just opened up my laptop, got some Wi-Fi, and started broadcasting via an internet broadcasting station. And I had 500,000 people watching me. It was extraordinary to be in the position of being able to report what was going on and be one of few journalists who was actually reporting the whole time during the war. I mean, literally one of a few, a handful in English, native English journalists. So extraordinary experience, and as I say, so many people watching and supporting the project. And also absolutely, obviously devastating. I mean, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done, having to report this massacre, this massacre, this massacre, this massacre, this massacre. There were 5 very prominent ones, women and children being killed, and etc. And the constant bombardment, because it didn't stop. It basically, it was never appeased. And so in some areas, for example, a particular area would be subjected to, for example, aerial bombardment for up to 6 hours, or in one case an area was subjected to bombardment by air, sea and land for 5 hours. Which is, for the Palestinians, blatant state terrorism. So having to actually report that and be 3 minutes drive away from this person just being blown up or etc. Is, as I say, one of the hardest things I've ever done, psychologically, emotionally, and etc.
Were you afraid?
Yeah, for particular occasions I was explicitly afraid during the time. Israel has a policy of targeting sites in second wave attacks. So after it does an airstrike, for example, within seconds, minutes, hours or days later, it attacks the site again for whatever, surety or something like this. Makes it extremely difficult for paramedics, makes it extremely difficult for journalists to cover these incidents. So being a journalist in Gaza is extremely difficult. And in fact, 3 were killed during the war and dozens injured. Some were deliberately targeted. So it was extremely dangerous, to be honest with you, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you, one of the things that we heard about was that they had dropped a bomb on a hotel where the journalists were staying?
Israel did not drop a bomb on a hotel, but 20 meters away, 30 seconds walk away from the most prominent hotel in Gaza where international journalists stay, it targeted a site which shattered all of the glass on the front of the journalist building where the CNN reporter is staying, and etc. And obviously this has a level of terrorism on the reporters and etc. Excuse me, who don't know whether they're going to become the next instance of collateral damage. I mean, when you have shattered glass on a building, this is a danger to the civilians inside. A family member of one of my best friends in Gaza had her neck slit open by shattered glass, and she was hundreds of meters away from a blast site. So being one of the most densely populated places on Earth, the point is that no one is safe from either explicit or implicit targeting.
Harry, in my opinion, this kind of action that the Israeli takes doesn't have anything to do with security. It's basically they're trying to break the will of the Palestinians and make them accept whatever the Israelis giving them and the solution that they're dictating on them. Do you think that's working? Do you think the Palestinian people are broken now and they're ready to accept what's been given to them?
This is one of the tragedies of the conflict, is that Israel is so militaristic and so indoctrinated as a society at an average citizen level that it's basically deaf, dumb and blind to the reality of the Palestinian people, and particularly the reality about how they feel about Israel's treatment of them and the future. And the point is that the Palestinian people will never give up the struggle, and I'm not talking about armed resistance necessarily, I'm talking about the struggle at a spiritual, physical or societal level for their rights, their self-determination, their security, and etc. And so when Israel tries to terrorize the population through state violence, it's actually totally counterproductive, because it just, if you like, makes more solidified Palestinians feeling that they're struggling against a force which has no moral legitimacy and doesn't have basic humanity embedded in it, and that makes them feel, obviously, certainly of moral superiority in the conflict. And so, I mean, even strategically speaking, this most recent self-defense operation has done the exact opposite, because there were 4 Israelis killed during the 8-day operation, including 1 combatant and 1 child. So this obviously isn't working, this self-defense operation. At the same time, there was a terrorist attack which went unattributed, but there was a terrorist attack in Israel proper during the operation, which is one of the factors that led to it stopping on 8 days. And also, politically speaking, the Palestinians have become less divided than they were before as a result of the operation. The resistance groups have become strengthened by increased popular support. And during this operation, we saw for the first time in a long time military coordination and unity between the different previously ad hoc resistance groups. And so for the first time in a long time, the Palestinians have felt like they have their own defense forces. So, I mean, this really makes a parody of the idea of this operation becoming for self-defense or some sort of strategic advantage for Israel. It's done the opposite. And obviously, most obviously, whenever Israel commits these sorts of attacks and operations and crimes, the world becomes more and more outraged at Israel's treatment of its neighbors. So it loses geopolitical, diplomatic support as well. So, as I say, it's a tragedy for the Israeli society because what they're doing is totally counterproductive.
Yeah, it certainly is, and it looks like, I mean, the Israeli elections are what, next week? And
So it's next
it
week.
looks like Netanyahu is going to win again. At least that's what the polls are saying, and that the government he'll be forming with, you know, I don't know if we want to take the time to explain Israeli politics or not, but the government is going to be formed. Looks like it's going to be even more conservative than it was before.
Which is difficult to do because
Yeah.
his party doesn't even accept that there is an occupation of any land. They think that the whole Palestinian lands, the occupied Palestinian territories designated by the world, by international law, by the United Nations, is a fallacy. They think that Palestine never existed, does not exist, does not have a right to exist, that the Palestinians are an invented mythical people, and etc. So if they want to go more right-wing than that, I'm sure the world is going to find that troublesome.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because one of the, I can't remember what his name is, but one of the people that they think is going to form a government with Netanyahu was talking about transfer of Palestinians.
This is
And
basically soft language for ethnic cleansing.
that's right. Yes, and but of course he calls it transfer.
Transfer.
Yeah, but yeah, that's what it is.
So, as you said, the Iron Fist or the military solution is out of the picture and doesn't seem like that's going to accomplish what the Israelis wanted, and the peace process is dead for a long time now. What do you think is the way forward from here? Where is the solution?
Well, I mean, the point is that the conflict is totally asymmetrical in as much as there is a conflict. It's an injustice. The point is that one people have their land occupied, one people have been refugee, displaced, ethnically cleansed, projects of ethnic cleansing put on them, terrorized and etc., besieged most recently obviously in Gaza and etc. The Israelis don't have these things. So there is obviously an imbalance to the conflict. Now the point is that the propping up of Israel as the aggressor in this conflict, which is how it's seen in Gaza, is done by Western support. Quantitatively, US support. Qualitatively, Canadian support, where I've just been. I mean, Harper's administration constitutes the most proactive Israel support in the world. Obama's aid packages and etc. constitutes the most bulk support of Israel. And the UK obviously following behind as the poodle as usual. So the point is these three countries particularly, and the other poodles in Europe and etc., have to change their tune and realize that their populations are not happy with the principles that they're adopting in terms of supporting Israel and etc., propping up the aggressor against the underdog. And what this means is that it becomes a domestic political situation in North America and in Europe. And in order to affect political change here in the West, we have to use not necessarily traditional political tactics of voting and petitioning and etc., but also alternative tactics to try and leverage not just Israel, but by our own domestic political representations to follow our will and represent us. And so there are various ways to do that, but by making the politicians feel that this is something that we care about proper, is fundamental to doing that. And there are various ways to do that, to actively campaign on the issue of Israel-Palestine and foreign policy with regard to Israel, and also to take up personal responsibility, shared moral responsibility, that our governments are doing this. Therefore, we have a responsibility of a fraction towards this having to be stopped. And that's not just spending a minute a day doing social media awareness building, but it's about not giving money to particular companies helping Israel breach international law, about saying I'm not going to vote with my dollar or my buck or my pound for the companies which sustain this position and also prop up Israel. And for example, when I arrived in Toronto, my first stop in Canada, just 5 minutes in downtown Toronto, and I saw all of these security vehicles going around the place from the G4S company. G4S is notorious amongst those that understand the Palestinian plight because it basically supports Israeli illegal colonization of Palestinian land, props up a security apparatus for the infrastructure Israel has illegally built in Palestinian land. And this is a corporation, G4S, which should obviously be boycotted. It's breaching international law by supporting that project. And in the UK and in Western Europe, we've had successes at getting G4S off the program of many councils and etc. And although the media doesn't report it, we know that these things are happening and that it's something worth investing our time and energies in. So this is boycotting, divesting and sanctioning strategically corporations and entities. So people can Google BDS.
In the United States, it's Caterpillar, Motorola Solutions,
HP.
and HP, Hewlett-Packard. And yeah, those are campaigns that are going on. And TIAA Craft, which is a retirement group it's a
retirement
investment
fund
group.
Yeah. And we're not, it's just we're putting pressure on TIAA Craft to drop Caterpillar from their investment because of their support to the Israeli army with the bulldozers and the equipment that demolish the Palestinian homes and uproot the Palestinian olive groves and their infrastructure. And
Motorola Solutions invests in infrastructure in the Israeli settlements with checkpoints and things like that.
I think people will be really shocked actually to hear about the level of international corporate support of Israel. And it's not just acquiescence, like, for example, a company will be happy to work with Israel. It's really not this. And the strategic boycotting does not go against this. It goes against the companies which are active in particularly supporting Israel and encouraging Israel. Caterpillar, as you said, designs basically militarized tractors to not kill Palestinians, but ethnically cleanse them. And for example, Motorola sponsors particular production of, let's say, for example, wireless communication technology, which helps the Israeli military, and it goes on and it goes on. And it's not even just strategic aid, it's actually even boardroom vocal support for the Israeli military and Israeli state. Absolute support. And this is the reason why there is moral legitimacy, particularly to boycott these companies.
Yeah, and in terms of, I'm going to switch the topic just a little bit now to what the Palestinians themselves are doing. I thought they had a genius event the other day. They built a settlement on their own land, and it was wonderful. You know, it lasted, I don't know, 12 hours, something like that. Maybe it was more like 24 hours, less than 48 hours anyway. They built a little settlement called Bab el-Shams, which means Gate of the Sun.
Gate of the Sun.
Gate of the Sun, which is, I guess, the name of a book that was written. and the author of the book called and offered his support, I heard. And the thing that was such genius about it is, you know, they're building a settlement on their own land, which is exactly what the Israelis do, right? They go on Palestinian land, build these little settlements, bring what the Palestinians or the Israelis usually do is bring, well, we call them trailers. They're called something else in Israel. What do you call them? I don't know.
Mobile homes, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. And what the Palestinians did was build tents. But they built tents, stayed in them, and just like they did in Occupy here, it reminded me a lot of Occupy.
Yeah.
Iowa City, we did that right down here in the park. And, excuse me. And it didn't take long before, guess what happened?
Yeah.
They
The
kicked
military
them out.
came, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and talk about ethnic cleansing.
And the irony about this is that the people that they came in and settled that land or put their camp on, they had the permission from the landowner to be there, and the Israelis came and say that you're illegally here, while the Israelis are building on land that they don't belong to them, and they don't have any permission to do it, while the government are looking and watching and actually protecting them and building on a land that they don't belong to, that doesn't belong to them, and they don't have a permit from the owners to build on it.
The owner was Palestinian, right?
The owner is
But
Palestinian.
the problem is that Israel doesn't even accept Palestinians' land ownership program. So if there is contested land, it calls everything contested that it occupies. It just says, well, we're taking this for a security zone.
Yeah.
So sorry, we're going to have to demolish your home, or you can't live here, and etc.
But the thing about Bab el-Shams that you know, I mean, this is the very first time where people in the world saw something that happened. You know, they realized what was happening. You know, I was reading comments on the social media for the very first time. People were like, "Oh, now I get it," you know, because they didn't understand the whole idea. Because here they are, yeah, you're right, building on their own land with permission from the Palestinian owner of the land, and the Israelis kicked them off their own land.
Maybe people watching the show don't know that there are two bits of Palestine that exist that are left. One is the West Bank, which we're talking about now, with a ground occupation, and Gaza, which is under total Palestinian administration, where there is no ground occupation. And in a way, I've been to both areas, and in a way, there's a very different sense of suffering. One is very much a kind of state terrorism effect from the skies in Gaza. And in the West Bank, it's primarily a kind of in-your-face humiliation. I don't know if you agree, but I feel like it's, in a way, almost even a different conflict, actually, in West Bank. It feels like that.
But again, I guess it's continuation. It's a different policy, but continuation to the policy of breaking the Palestinian people. In the West Bank, they're doing it by confiscating the land. They're kicking the people out of their homes. Just make it easier for them, harder for them to live there, and wanted them to get out of there.
Yeah.
In the other hand, in Gaza, because they don't have any people or any Israelis within the Palestinian population, they have the free hand to go in and bomb and shell the areas and do whatever they want to do. So it's a different tactic, but it's the same policy. It's basically just breaking the Palestinians, so they will accept whatever solution that they are imposed on them, like the Kantustan solution, which is basically the Israeli will take all the land and then put the Palestinians in concentration camps in the big cities like in Nablus and Ramallah and Hebron, and then the area in between is going to be controlled by the Israelis.
Like reservations?
Like reservations, or the Bantustan solution in South Africa, where they isolate the black from the white, and then taking the land. And that's the whole thing about the Zionism, is that they want the land, but they don't want to do anything with the people.
Yeah.
So
well, that was, you know, I find this interesting, this particular aspect, because in South Africa, they needed the blacks, so to speak, for the economy. Whereas Palestinians say to me that, you know, we know very well that Israeli society and the economy doesn't depend on us existing. And that's why it's a particular threat. because they want us out of our land, and simple as that.
Yeah, it's a little bit different.
I guess I want to switch topics, and you talked a little bit about the Palestinian from the human side and the culture and all that stuff, and just a couple of months ago when we had the election here, Mitt Romney went to Israel, and he said that the Palestinians have problems because of their culture, and they're not compared to the Western culture, and so you're Western, and you have the experience. You lived in UK, and then you went there. In your opinion, how do you judge the Palestinians and their culture? And do you think that the problem is in their culture or something else?
The problem is that in the West we have a general superiority complex, and we think that because we have first-class, first-world so-called capitalist economies, that we have it better. Statistically, we don't. If you look at the world happiness ratings and etc., which actually are some material evidence to go by. And our leadership also think very much that we are the best people on earth, basically, and that we have some sort of duty, neo-colonialist duty to go and spread our values and our understanding of reality around the world, which obviously we're very happy to do in Libya and Iraq and etc. And the point is that, as you allude to, the Western leaders basically think that Israel is like us, and that Palestinians are the other. They're Muslim, they're Arab, they're poor, or whatever classification you want to give, and therefore, are less authoritative as human beings. Basically, they don't have life right. They don't quite understand how to live properly. And in fact, this particular thing is an Israeli propaganda trait. The Palestinians don't know how to live on their own land. Rather, the Arabs don't know how to live on their own land. We will show them, and etc. In fact, statistically speaking, Israel is living unsustainably on the land, whereas the Palestinians are living sustainably, in theory. But the point is, obviously, that, as we talked about before, Israel acts in a way as if it doesn't want peace. The Palestinians, since the ceasefire came into place now a few weeks ago, an Egyptian brokered ceasefire that ended the 8-day war, the Palestinians have had zero aggression against the Israeli state. Israel has killed 3 Palestinians and injured more than 75. So this shows to me the symbolic distribution of predisposition to violence and non-violence, and it's obviously an asymmetrical conflict. And this Romney point just goes to show that the United States has also got its head on the wrong way round with regard to understanding the aggressor and etc. Sadly, though, from the US position, I'm not a US citizen, but it's not surprising, is it, because of what happened in Iraq and what's going on still in Iraq and obviously in Afghanistan, that the US doesn't, let's say, quite have it right. It's the same thing, basically. In this sense, Israel is just, a 53rd state, or whatever you want to call it.
Well, and I think in a lot of ways that's true. I think that in many cases, Israel takes their cue from the United States. Even talking about putting Arabs on reservations or bantustands. Yep. Look what we did to our Native American population. And look what happened in Iraq, with the state terrorism and the civilian casualties there. Yep. And look at Gaza, it's just a microcosm, right. Relatively speaking. And so, with the United States as a model, it shouldn't be surprising. You guys, I think, you can tell me more, but you from what I know, have a chronic problem with veteran psychological disorder, coming back with PTSD and etc. It's exactly the same in the US military. There are young conscripts who have gone now to Europe and, taking drugs in large numbers, seeking alcohol and etc. to try and deal with their psychological condition, having, harassed, humiliated and killed innocents and etc. So it's the same, really, in this way. I think it is, and I think that's an interesting point. One of the things that I've heard some Israelis talk about is not only what the occupation is doing to the Palestinians, but what it's doing to the Israelis. In their thinking and their thought process. And what kind of a person does it take, to treat other people the way they do? Well, to me, it's the status quo is, spiritually degenerizing, basically. Yep. This is what my Israeli friends tell me, is that, a lot of Israelis are leaving
You know, there is a brain drain, intellectually speaking, and really the way things are headed. I mean, this is, I should have said, this is the reason why in recent days and weeks we see things like the birthright program. The diasporic Jews, and most Jews don't live in Israel, obviously. People who identify themselves as Jews can go to Israel and get citizenship, and then there's a mass funded campaign to get Jews to go over and populate, basically, in Israel, Palestine, to try and redress this fact that people don't want to live in this state. Which is somewhat understandable, I think.
Yeah, which is really interesting. I mean, that's part of the dilemma, the political dilemma that Israel faces, is that, you know, one of the reasons that Israel promotes two states, or say they promote two states, is because if they have one state, they're going to be in the minority before too long.
And that's the left. That's the left. The Israeli left is saying that we want this two-state solution because the demographic threat, which called the Palestinian demographic threat, it's just not right to be a threat just because you're from a different race or from different ethnicity.
This is the essential problem, though, really, because the point is that in the 21st century, most people are not really comfortable in principle with a kind of ethnic exclusivist state, actually. People are not in principle happy with this. Although people may be practically comfortable with a Jewish state existing, in principle people see that this is a big problem. And then when they hear about the indigenous population being from a different ethnic identification, if not absolutely historically, because we have the Semitic situation, then in most recent history with the Arabs and Palestinians, people become really worried about how to put this into practice and address this problem. And there are many people in Israel and in Palestine, not particularly many in Israel, but many in Palestine, who would like to see a one-state secular democracy exist where anyone can go and live and etc.
Well, obviously, I think, you know, that's the way we're headed, regardless. I can't see any possibility of a two-state solution anymore. Do you think?
No, with the way that the Israelis have been building in the West Bank and all the settlements and the destruction of all the peace process in the way is just made the two-state solution is non-viable anymore.
You know, actually, I'm agnostic on how the conflict should be solved. I think the Palestinians should take a referendum on it and that they should decide. But I see both sides of the story, and I think that, or the game, if you like. But I see that in a way, the two-state solution is still viable because, for example, Gaza was being colonized by Israel just a few years ago, and it withdrew thousands of its illegal settlers and settlements. And so although there are obviously many, many more in the West Bank, in theory there's a precedent set for decolonization. So, you know, I think that the point is Israel has been forced to concede land and population before.
But what about the refugees, that's where the problem is, that if you wanted to keep a Jewish-only state and then you have the right of return for the Palestinians, then Israel will cease to be a Jewish-only state, which is the whole idea of the Israel creation.
Exactly. I mean, their point is that there are refugees not just from the recent 8-day war, but from the previous 22-day war, from 1967's Six-Day War, and from when the conflict started in 1948, the creation of Israel, what Palestinians call the catastrophe, where the ethnic cleansing began. So for many Palestinians, I would say certainly most, if not all in Gaza, the conflict started 65 years ago, and the root of the conflict, which was the original expelling of most of the population, has to be addressed, and the two-state solution probably doesn't do that in practice.
Yeah. You know, I'm with you. I mean, I think Palestinians should be able to make that decision, but I can't see how it's going to be viably possible. I mean, I think, you know, maybe you're right. They could go back to the 67 borders. That's what the recent UN statehood decision was all about. They recognized Palestine as a non-member state of the UN along 67 borders, and that would. I guess one of the things I've said is that I don't preclude the possibility that the Israelis could stay. They'd just be residents of Palestine. And how many do you think would stay? Because many of the settlers are very ideological settlers. And, they probably wouldn't stay.
Exactly, yeah. In the two-state solution. Yeah.
Right.
And that's what the Palestinian Authority said. If they want to stay, they can stay, but they will be treated equal, not the way that they are treated now with
preferential.
Yeah, preferential. So, but as you said, you don't know how many of them will stay, if any.
And there are settlers, and two main types of settlers: ideological settlers and economic settlers. Those people who are paid. I mean, they're all paid. They're all paid by the Israeli government to live on Palestinian land, and
it's sad. The poorest of Israel go and colonize someone else's country.
Yeah.
Because there are incentives to do so.
With our money, with our tax money.
Yeah, exactly. And our money. The United States sends $3 billion a year. In case there's anybody in our audience who doesn't know that yet. And most of that is to maintain the occupation. Without that $3 billion, they couldn't maintain the occupation.
Unfathomable to me that this happens in the 21st century. I mean, the UK is complicit and proactive enough in supporting Israel, but sending money to a tiny little country with a tiny population halfway across the world, and it's literally halfway across the world. I've just been there. It certainly feels like it as well, as you can tell by the creases on my face. But I mean, I just don't understand at a basic psychological level. I mean, I do understand, but to me it's a tragedy that the American people think that this is a good idea. I mean, it's just bizarre.
Oh, I don't think most of the people, first of all, most people don't even know it. And most of the people that do know it don't like it.
Are you sure? Because I mean, in the presidential debates, in the foreign policy debates, they were boxing over how many times you'd been to Israel and did he skip Israel in his Middle East visit and stuff. I thought.
Oh yeah, maybe you're
right. But that's the thing is the brainwashing of the media, of the people here, is that the Israelis are the victims and we need to support them and we will elect whoever give more support to the Israelis. Because they're people, they're like us, and they're against the people that we don't like, and the people they don't like us. So that's why we support them.
But the reason, I mean, that's what you were saying this earlier about, painting the Palestinians or the Arabs. I mean, they don't even call them Palestinians because they don't believe Palestine exists.
Exactly.
So they call them Arabs, are somehow less than.
Exactly.
Or in many cases, they use the word terrorists to dehumanize people,
Exactly.
And if you're not human, then
free,
they might
free for all, isn't it?
Exactly. So so the media. I mean, this is one way we make a difference. You're making a bigger difference than we are here on my little TV show, but telling it like it is, and like you said, just being the voice of the voiceless Palestinians.
And faceless. I mean, the Palestinians are faceless. Many people don't even know what a Palestinian looks like. They just think of a car being blown up in Tel Aviv, and they see the word Palestinian. And this is. I know this is a mammoth task, but something which is nice to try and redress.
Yeah.
So what's next for you, Harry?
Well, after the US tour, I'm going to Malaysia, New Zealand, Australia, and then Ireland in the UK, and then Egypt. And then after that tour is over, I'll go back to Gaza and continue work on more reporting and some more structural media projects. And then we'll see what happens. But I feel an urge to go to other parts of the world to do the same thing there.
Where can people find your work?
People can go to harryfear.tv. My surname is F-E-A-R, harryfear.tv, or they can go to gazareport.com and they can find all of my stuff there.
That'll be good. So are you, what other places are you going to in the United States?
Most obviously, next I'm going to New York and Massachusetts, which are two pretty good strongholds actually, who are very, there are groups there who are sort of wanting to have me a lot. So this will be great. I'll be meeting two very, very famous symbolic personalities who are associated with the Palestinian cause in America. So this will be very exciting and hopefully you know, a momentum builder before I move on to Malaysia.
That sounds great. So
people, by the way, can go, if they have friends in New York or Boston, they can go to gazareport.com and see where the other talks are, so they can send it to their friends and family. Like
yeah, that's a good idea. And this show will also be on YouTube, and there'll be other things.
I'll share your show.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll be famous too a little bit. And Yasser, you know. Okay, I'm guessing we better wrap up a little bit. We have 3 minutes, and we're getting the high sign. So what do we want to say in the last 3 minutes?
I think we should talk about what happened to your relative in Gaza. I mean, this is a symbolic example.
Well, I guess you've been there, and you've been when that's when before that eight days aggression against Gaza started. That's when a 13-year-old cousin of mine was killed by an Israeli sniper, or nobody knows, but it's either a helicopter or a sniper. But he was playing in front of his home, and that's just 1 block from where my parents live. And he was actually, my nephew was just playing with him 5 minutes before he was shot, and he's a close friend of my nephew, and it was really tough on the whole family and tough on him, especially my nephew, because he's a close friend of him. But it's just that kid, that innocent kid, that he's just playing soccer in front of his family home when he was shot dead. And you can tell us more about the story.
We don't know, and we spoke to the doctor that deals with 13-year-old Hamid Abu Dagher. And the doctor was explaining that the injuries that Hamid sustained by Israeli force, the weapon is unknown. I mean, at the time I was in the area, which was a coincidence. We didn't see him being killed, but we were hundreds of meters away. There were 2 helicopters, Apache helicopters, paid by US tax dollars, in the air at the time. There was an Israeli sniper post hundreds of meters from Hamid's home, but there are also Israeli tanks and jeeps incurring into the Palestinian territory. And Hamid's wounds were a 2-millimeter hole on the right lower torso and a 2-millimeter hole on the left upper torso, and basically his insides were sliced up. And this is something which is normal in the Gazan experience and normal for Gazan doctors to live with. So for me, this is how the operation started. This sums up the situation of the conflict. Innocent lives being taken for no reason, with no explanation, no justification. The Israeli military won't say anything.
What was the Israeli military doing in the area to begin with? I thought they weren't in Gaza anymore.
Well, along this area in East Khan Yunis, there is regular ground incursions. It's an exception to the rule.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing, you know.
Even with all the eyewitnesses and everybody around it, my dad was around the area, and you were around the area, and everybody saw the helicopters and the jeeps, and the Israelis are still denying that they did anything wrong.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? It's just amazing.
And this is normal in Gaza, to have the helicopters and the jeeps. People should know that this is not an aberration. People get used to playing soccer with, basically an alien air force above your head.
Yeah, because one of the comments you read on the net is, well, what's a kid doing playing out there anyway? It's like
exactly, it's his home.
Yeah, that's where he lives. He was in front of his house. Well, I want to thank you very much, both of you. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thanks for making Iowa City one of your stops, Harry.
Thank you for having me.
And if I don't know how soon we'll be doing it, but he's going to be giving a public presentation on Friday, so the 18th of January. So if anybody sees it before then.
Thank you very much, Harry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To fight their oil war. National Geographic and the Times-Picayune, they forecast the apocalypse, said it was coming soon. Preparations must be made, they said. Now is the time. It was years ago, they shouted. Inaction was a crime. They said the dikes must be improved and the wetlands must be saved. But Washington decided instead they should be paved, 'cause laws were more important than